This is Letter from America. Today's topic is Al Jazeera's message to ZANU PF is Rine manyanga hariputirwe, or truth about corruption will emerge. Zimbabweans anxiously awaited the broadcast by the Arab TV network Al Jazeera about corruption in Zimbabwe. But this TV network announced the postponement of the broadcast. They did not say for how long this broadcast would be postponed. It is not clear whether Al Jazeera will resume its broadcast in its original form or cancel it. Some reports say Mnangagwa and ZANU PF used intermediaries to negotiate the cancellation of the program. This attempt apparently failed. Then Al Jazeera appeared to have agreed to ZANU PF demands of issuing its statements on corruption in reaction to the Al Jazeera broadcast. Mnangagwa and ZANU PF statements were their usual propaganda. Zimbabweans do not believe any statements from ZANU PF propaganda machinery. Next, the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe Governor John Mangunja made a lengthy, incoherent statement in which he said there were no sanctions against Zimbabwe. This caught the attention of many Zimbabweans because the Mnangagwa regime has claimed always that there were sanctions against this Diziri Pachinoi regime. What is unclear now is what Al Jazeera will do next. There is hope that Al Jazeera will resume the broadcast in its original form now that the Mnangagwa regime has been given an opportunity to react with statements that did not convince anyone. It is no wonder this regime is contemptuously referred to as Diziri Pachinoi. Some people are not aware why this is what ZANU PF is nicknamed, namely Diziri Pachinoi. It was called the Diziri Pachinoi incident. In 2007, a self-proclaimed spirit medium, Rotina Mavunga, real name Nometa Tagarira, convinced the ZANU PF political bigwigs that refined diesel was oozing from a rock in Chinhoyi. Even the late President Mugabe chaired cabinet meetings in which claims by the grade 3 educated Mavunga were discussed at length. A high-powered government delegation packed with people like State Security Minister Didimas Mtasa, Defense Minister Sidney Sekeramai, and Home Affairs Minister Kembo Mohadi were sent to Chinhoyi. The self-proclaimed spirit medium held a pipe out of which poured diesel to the sheer amazement and jubilation of the ministers. What they did not know was the pipe wound around a rock to a truck loaded with diesel. When they discovered that they had been fooled, they arrested the spirit medium. But ZANU PF was the butt of unending jokes. Several years later, one of those ministers was to officially open a dustbin in Chitungwiza. And believe it or not, these are the same people who have misruled for Zimbabwe for 42 years and are still in power to this today. Now, back to this week in Parliament. If ZANU PF had, as is well known now, hoped to keep the former MDC alliance stalwarts out of parliament, they were dead wrong. But even more ominous for ZANU PF was the fact that the CCC MPs were and are the wind of change of national discontent that is gathering momentum. And that wind of change blew open those doors to parliament for the CCC MPs. To the utter disgust of ZANU PF Speaker Jacob Mundenda, whose shrieking voice constantly berated the CCC MPs with threats of damnation, his bullying tactics did not damper the excitement and enthusiasm of the CCC MPs, whose colleagues banged loudly with their fists on their desks to welcome each other. CCC MPs ignored the speaker for whatever he said, and they shouted even louder, "Yellow, yellow, yellow." One CCC MP was heard to say, "Tadzoka tawa yellow. We are here, we are yellow, and better." Speaker Mudenda, who in the past has responded to and complied with every illegal letter of recall from the ZANU PF acolytes, Thokozani Kupe and Douglas Monzora, must have had an egg in his face when some of the same people he kicked out came roaring back triumphantly as CCC members of parliament. Attempts to block CCC MPs from entering parliament because they were wearing yellow ties failed. The MPs stormed in and completely ignored the speaker's ruling that they should not wear yellow ties. Welcome to the new era of defiance politics. In a remarkable contrast, the Economic Freedom Fighters EFF MPs in South Africa wore their red party dress styles to reflect what they stand for. No one bothered them. They were not called to order except when they misbehaved, of course. Even Mnangagwa wears his turkey scarf on some official occasions. Nobody has complained, except to the nickname Tongombea Scarfman. The people of Zimbabwe had effectively overruled Mudenda and his ZANU PF henchmen and returned the recalled MPs with bigger electoral vote margins. All efforts by ZANU PF to persuade the people of Zimbabwe to vote for Monzora and surrogates in the now defunct and abandoned MDCT alliance were rejected soundly when Monzora was equally soundly defeated. It might serve his professional reputation, if there is still any, if the Speaker of Parliament would stop being an errand boy for angry ZANU PF MPs Monzora or Kupe. The third issue that made for a miserable week for ZANU PF was a fact-based expose of corruption in Zimbabwe and how it is affecting the country. Award-winning investigative journalist Hopewell Chingono addressed the Conference on Human Rights and Democracy in Geneva, Switzerland, and revealed that every month Zimbabwe loses $100 million through corruption. Other reports say corruption costs Zimbabwe more than $1 billion every year. Chingono said that if corruption was stopped, all of this money which amounts to billions of dollars, could be used to support health services and other infrastructure in the country. Chingono posed the question, how can Zimbabwe, which is so rich in resources, be so poor? According to statistics, more than 60% of Zimbabweans live in extreme poverty. And yet, another development that contributed to a bad week for ZANU PF was the mysterious death of a ZANU PF thug who criminally drove and killed a CCC member. For people with the Diziri Inchinoi mindset, this must have been another baffling event in the week. An online newspaper report read, John Namburo, the ZANU PF Central Committee member who ran over a CCC member on election day in a hit-and-run incident and had been terrorizing villagers in Ward 2 in Chawona, has died. No one knows what killed him, as he was not sick. And this will send shivers down the spines of ZANU PF thugs. By all accounts, the main takeaway from the recent by-elections in Zimbabwe demonstrated two objective facts in the country's political landscape. The first undisputed fact was that the 2-month-old CCC gained a landslide victory. CCC is now the political force in Zimbabwe. The second undisputed fact is that it is slowly sinking into the ZANU PF mindset that there is a national wave of discontent and anger at this party that has been in power for 42 years. Indeed, as former British Prime Minister Harold Macmillan said in 1960, the wind of change is blowing across Africa. Fast forward 62 years. Today, Zimbabwe is at the cusp or receiving end of the wind of change. Of course, ZANU PF has known all along, for many years, about the discontent against its despotic rule. But what ZANU PF had in the past refused to accept until now is the extent of that discontent, that frustration, that despair, and the fact that this discontent is gaining momentum across the length and breadth of the country. Three things frighten ZANU PF right now. First, Zimbabwe is now a tinderbox of national discontent, nationwide frustration. The vast majority of Zimbabweans have had enough with ZANU PF. The word Zrakwana, Sokwanele, enough is enough, has now gained a real momentum. Young Zimbabweans, who form more than 70% of the country's population, see no future for themselves in the country. In this politically toxic environment, nobody knows what single incident or a combination of events will spark off a conflagration of mass uprising that will potentially leave this country in ruins. Secondly, ZANU PF knows and fears that the army and police are getting tired of protecting party officials and thugs through arbitrary persecutions and beatings and assaulting opposition CCC supporters. Without the army and police, where would ZANU PF be? This is exactly what the late Robert Mugabe asked at a secret meeting some years ago. He knew that ZANU PF had survived and still does by hiding behind the army and the police. But all of this is about to change. It is reported that at police and army camps, soldiers and police officers voted overwhelmingly for CCC candidates in the last by-elections. One widely reported event was at Chikurubi, where practically everyone voted for CCC. The old guard ZANU PF army and police, who occupy the higher echelons of power and control, are retiring. They are growing old and they are dying off. They are being replaced by a more youthful generation who has no allegiance to the Liberation War credentials, for the simple reason they were not born or were babies when independence came in April 1980. Advocate Chamisa, the president of CCC, was probably being fed baby food by his mother in 1980. His approach to today's political environment focuses on improving people's lives and opportunities. And his message resonates very well, not only with more than 70% of the Zimbabwean youth population, but also practically the vast majority of Zimbabweans who see their lives stuck in the bottomless sludge of poverty. The new generation of the youthful officials, some right at the top in the ranks of the army and police and CIO, do not follow the outdated and useless ZANU PF slogans. Even many members of ZANU PF are probably getting tired of their sing-song. We should continue to be in power because we fought the armed struggle or Chimurenga for the liberation of this country. But to the majority of Zimbabweans, this monotonous, broken record sing-song sounds like a hunter who goes out to hunt and comes back with nothing. Yet he still boasts he went out to hunt, but he didn't bring anything to the family. Unconfirmed reports suggest that the new officials in the army and police have been telling ZANU PF leadership they will be professional in their dealings with the criminal elements, regardless of what party they belong. They have also said they will follow the military and police rules as specified in the police and the army manuals. The 2001 Police Act stipulates that it is an offense for a police officer to use unnecessary violence towards or neglecting or in any way ill-treating any person in custody or other person with whom he may be brought into contact in the execution of his duty. The United Nations Basic Principles on the Use of Force and Firearms by Law Enforcement Officials provide that whenever the lawful use of force is unavoidable, security forces need to use restraint and act in proportion to the seriousness of the offense. Law enforcement officials should not use firearms against people except to protect against the imminent threat of death or serious injury. Many diaspora Zimbabweans have sent and are sending messages to police officers known to have used politically motivated violence against civilians that they risk being prosecuted for their crimes against humanity when a government that follows the rule of law is established in Zimbabwe. And nobody knows when that will be. It could be in 2023. Police are now aware they can, for the most part, be easily identified not only by members of the public but also by fellow police officers who may not approve what they are doing. They also know that their names and pictures can be published in the social media for the world to see. And third, the new generation of Zimbabweans are not easily scared of ZANU PF intimidation, threats, and acts of violence anymore. They confronted the police in Gokwe and Kwekwe, where the CCC rallies had been banned and ZANU PF thugs had attempted to disrupt those rallies. They have discovered, to their pleasant surprise, that ZANU PF is Risina Manyanga, an old story of an owl that boasted its ears were horns in order to strike fear and loyalty among other birds. But the birds soon discovered that this was a false claim. Moreover, ZANU PF is discovering that their threats and acts of violence are now meeting a strong headwind of defiance. Young CCC members are now successfully confronting those ZANU PF thugs. The youths recognize the policy of CCC as elaborated by President Chamisa of a peaceful political campaign and to avoid as much as possible engaging in violence. However, Firebrand, CCC Deputy National Chairman Job Sikala points out that under the international law, individuals have a right to defend themselves in whatever way they deem fit if they are attacked. CCC youths now have the mechanisms to spontaneously react when their colleagues are under attack. In one case, a farmer tweeted, "Wonderful, our youths have managed to repel the attacks from ZANU PF thugs and things are calm now at a rally in Kwekwe." There are other situations where the CCC youths have been able to subdue the ZANU PF thugs who were assaulting their colleagues. In Gokwe, CCC youths stood up against police who had brought water tanks to disperse the CCC rally. The youths did not disperse, but stood defiantly. Eventually, the police retreated as the youths threw stones at them. However, the old guard ZANU PF elements are still stubbornly daydreaming that they will rule forever. ZANU PF Secretary for Administration Obed Mpofu has declared that the ruling party will never surrender power, saying, "We are going to be in power for a very long time." Well, someone should remind Comrade Mpofu that 52 years ago, someone said something similar. On March 2, 1970, the then Prime Minister of Rhodesia, Ian Smith, boasted that there would be no black rule in 1,000 years. But 10 years later, black majority rule came to Zimbabwe in 1980. And Ian Smith lived long enough to see the wind of change sweep across the old Rhodesia. It will be interesting to ask Comrade Mpofu about what he said when ZANU PF, like Ian Smith, finds itself out of power given its loss of credibility and support from the vast majority of Zimbabweans. A former member of ZANU PF has described the party as a shadow of its former self. That is, a shell without substance. And if police and army support is withdrawn, ZANU PF will collapse like a deflated balloon. The clear message to Mnangagwa, Chiwengwa, Chiwenga and the ZANU PF is that this was a bad week for them. And to make matters worse, things are, from today, now going downhill for this motley crew and their decrepit party. An emerging nationwide coalition of the willing is forming. Now that Zimbabweans have come out of this experience wiser and even more determined to confront and defeat this ZANU PF monster. Thank you for listening.
This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis of the situation in Zimbabwe. Thank you for listening. This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis of the situation in Zimbabwe. Thank you for listening. This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis of the situation in Zimbabwe. Thank you for listening. This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis